We'll start out a little different today. I want to ask you a question you think about. What do you believe? And of course that question immediately calls to mind another question in your mind. What do we believe about what? That makes the point. What we believe is very important. And we need to know about what we believe. Growing up in the church, Hunter Street Baptist Church, 1700 4th Court West, Birmingham 8, Alabama. For you young folks, that 8 used to be a zone. Old people predate zip codes. Growing up there, I was taught that what I believed was very important. What I was not always taught was what the options were about what to believe. I also was not always taught good reasons for believing this or that or the other thing. Reasons for belief, religious reasons for religious belief, are called doctrines. I didn't hear that word much. You might never have heard that word. I don't know. But that's the reasons that we believe what we believe. Now, when I was a boy, mostly what I believed was because what my parents believed. And they told me what they believed. And I'm not just talking religiously here. My father was a convinced Chevrolet man. We had a 39 Chevrolet when I was born. We had that until I was 10 years old. My father flew to Dearborn, Michigan, bought that car at the factory for $733 and drove it back to Alabama in 1939, 2 years before I was born, a year and a half before I was born. And I grew up with that car. But I believe Chevrolet was the car. I had a good friend, Willard Motley, whose father believed Ford was the car. And I can recall Willard and I having pretty strong arguments about automobiles. Not because I knew squat about what went on inside the workings of a Chevrolet, or a Ford for that matter, but I believed Chevrolet was the only way to go. Because my father thought that. Now, I'm sure he didn't get into a fight with Willard Motley's father because they had a Ford, like Willard and I did, about what was the right way to do things. But what we believed was what our parents believed. Then I got a little older, got in school, started reading, and I began to believe what the authors believed that I was reading. And that's pretty much how we go through school. We get other authority figures besides our parents, and they tell us what they believe, either verbally or on the printed page. And we either go along with that, or because we believe something else, we go in a different direction. I can tell you that it is difficult for my students in clinical pastoral education at the VA hospital over here. Because I ask them to set goals for learning based on what they want to learn. And they keep saying, but you're supposed to tell me what I need to learn. They're used to the classroom, the academic environment. I'll tell you, the difference between clinical pastoral education and academic pastoral education and I realize this is not a great topic of interest to you, but I'm going somewhere with this. Academic pastoral education seminary. Fisher, your former pastor here, my dear friend, having supper with he and Caroline tonight. Fisher taught for 27 years in the classroom setting. He taught us here about 3 or 4 weeks ago in a relative classroom setting. Fisher was the authority. He knew what we wanted to learn, and he told us about it, and we listened to him. And if we'd been in the classroom, then we would have memorized it for the test and regurgitated it and probably forgotten 85% of it during the next 10 days after that. That's academic pastoral education. Academic education in any of the fields. The authority is a professor in the classroom. But in clinical pastoral education, who is the expert on that pastor's ministry, on that chaplain's ministry? They are. They know more about their ministry than I do, certainly. So instead of me being the authority on their ministry, they are the authority. They are the ones who know what they believe, who know what they need to learn to believe more fully, more usefully, more helpfully in their ministry. And they tell me what they want to learn. They're the authority. My job is to facilitate their learning process. How we believe determines how we live. We can see this in history. Adolf Hitler believed that the Germans were a master race. And he lived his life in such a way as to make that come true at the expense of millions of other people. He believed this. He lived this out. The world suffered for it. What we believe is important negatively. What we believe is important positively. Martin Luther King. Learn from Gandhi. Learn from Thoreau. Learn from Walt Whitman. Came up with the idea the way to change the culture was for non-violent civil disobedience. And we know the results of that in the civil rights movement, in the Bill of Rights, in our current culture, which still has a long way to go, but has come a long way because Martin Luther King believed in non-violent civil disobedience as a way to change bad law, unjust law. Everybody doesn't believe in non-violent civil disobedience. And we have negative results because some people believe the way to change is through revolution, even if it's violent. What we believe is important. A song of sunshine through the rain, of spring across the snow, a balm to heal the hurts and pains, a peace surpassing woe. Lift up your heads, you sorrowing ones, and be more glad of heart. For Calvary and Easter Day, earth's saddest day and gladdest day, were just 3 days apart. What you believe is important. In our scripture passage today and last week, the 20th chapter of John's Gospel, the point made in both halves of that gospel, which I read to you last week and this week, is that Jesus' resurrection has come. Verses 1 through 18 last week, Magdalene, Peter and John, a beloved disciple. In the text, the second half today, the disciples without Thomas, the disciples with Thomas. We have a double story. both weeks. And then verses 30 through 31 today, it's a concluding statement of the gospel. Chapter 21 of John is an addition. Somebody stuck it on there. Maybe one of John's disciples, maybe somebody else from the church. They added that after the gospel. Both these resurrection stories are double stories, and they demonstrate that faith, what we believe, is generated in different ways. The beloved disciple saw the empty tombs and believed. Mary Magdalene didn't know until she heard Jesus speak on the way back last week. The disciples believed when they saw Jesus in the upper room. Thomas did not believe because he hadn't seen until the next week. And then he believed. Faith comes in various ways to various people. Now, I'm using the term faith here, but I'm still with the question, what do you believe? What do I believe? And faith is more than belief, but it is not less than belief. So what we believe is important in terms of faith. There's several different ways to deal with what we believe. One is to see and believe. The old saying, seeing is believing. That's not always the case. I always get a kick out of seeing magicians work at parties and other places. They can do sleight of hand tricks so that I could swear there was a golf ball in somebody's hand, then it's gone, then it appears behind somebody else's ear. And so we can't always believe what we see. That golf ball didn't actually disapparate here and all of a sudden come into existence over here. There's a trick involved. Seeing's not always believing, but if we see something, it seems to me we're much more likely to believe it. The beloved disciple, the women at the tomb when they saw Jesus, Thomas, the second Sunday night, we can see and believe. The old saying, I'm from Missouri, show me, has something to say here. That it's possible to see and not believe. The religious leaders in first century Palestine, they saw what Jesus did. They heard what Jesus said. And they didn't believe. They refused to accept the evidence of their eyes. They refused to accept the reality that happened right there in front of them. This difficulty in putting the seeing and the believing together infected not only the religious leaders, it affected to some extent the disciples, the apostles, who were surprised at the resurrection. They didn't believe it initially. Didn't expect it, even though they'd been told. The baptizer in prison, you remember that, sent some of his disciples to Jesus saying, are you the one we've been looking for, or do we need to look somewhere else? So it's possible to see and either not believe or not believe temporarily, or after something happens, I have seen God's power and presence in you people for 30 years now. I know God's power and presence is a reality, and I can say to you that from the 4th of July last year until now, I do not always see God's power and presence. I believe in God's power and presence. I have seen God's power and presence. I do not always experience that these days with Lane's loss. So I have some empathy for seeing, and I have some empathy for the baptizer in his situation. And then we cannot see and not believe. That's Thomas on Easter evening when the other apostles saw the Lord and believed, and Thomas didn't see and didn't believe and said, I will not believe unless I can see. I'm not going to believe in absentia. Now, I've wondered about Thomas. The world's wondering about Thomas. We give him a nickname, Doubting Thomas. That's pretty pitiful. Based on the New Testament evidence, this is the only doubting situation with Thomas. Thomas was ready to die with the Lord. Earlier in John's Gospel, Thomas gave us that great, how can we know the Father? How can we know what we haven't seen? And Jesus answered, he who has seen me has seen the Father. That was Thomas' question. Thomas was right in there. But we remember him for that one, unless I see, unless I put my finger, unless I stick my hand, I'm not going to believe. And so we give him the name Doubting Thomas. John Ewing Roberts tells a story about the Thomas in us. John Ewing Roberts' grandmother told him of a man in her Kentucky small town who was a teetotaler. He did not touch alcoholic beverages. He would not have had a margarita up at Chabella's. He would have gone the other direction. But one time, I don't know how this happened. John Ewing Roberts didn't know how this happened. But this man, one time on a Saturday afternoon, got roaring drunk and drove a buggy down the street in this town singing, there'll be a hot time in the old town tonight. And as you might imagine, that small town always looking for things to talk about. They gave this guy a nickname, Hot Time. And for the rest of his life, and he was a teetotaler for the rest of his life, but he was always known as Hot Time. That's kind of like Doubting Thomas. One instance, not seeing, not believing, has conditioned us to give Thomas the name and the image. I'm guessing he just didn't want to get his hopes up. After we got the diagnosis, 4th of July, Lane's hopes immediately were up. She got that website. She got the other website about survivors of pancreatic cancer, and her hopes were way up here. Mine never were, with the glass half empty. But seeing her hopes die, one of the most difficult things I've ever had to experience. And I think Thomas didn't want to get in that situation. One of the good things, one of the good things about a glass being half empty is I have seldom been disappointed. Because I didn't have my hopes too high. Or if I did get disappointed with the glass half empty, I didn't have as far to fall. so it wouldn't be as painful. Of course, I never enjoyed the things the way Lane did. And she was God's blessing for me, obviously, for all those years. But I think Thomas probably just was afraid to get his hopes up about Jesus' resurrection. Whatever. That's what happened. He did not see, did not believe. But then in the scripture that I read to you, Jesus said, "You've seen me and you believed. Blessed are they who have not seen and believed." Hey, Cotton Day. That's us. That's the church. That's modern Christianity in all the generations, in all the centuries since the first century. All of us who did not see with our eyes, who did not hear with our ears, who did not touch with our hands the word of life. Jesus says, we're the ones who are blessed. Because we have not seen and believed. When Thomas saw the Lord, there was no question, and we're not told that he actually went over and touched the nail prints or where the Spirit was in his side. He just, when he saw it, my Lord and my God. The good news is we didn't have to be there. We didn't have to see, hear, and touch to be blessed. Blessed are you who believe, who have not seen. That's us. We can sing a song of sunshine through the rain, of spring against the snow, a balm to heal the hurts and pain, a peace surpassing woe. Lift up your heads, O Cottondale, and be more glad of heart, for Calvary and Easter Day, earth's saddest day and gladdest day, were just 3 days apart. Who hath ears to hear, let them hear.